thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. I know that there's a lot of things that compete for your time and your attention and your interest in our topic, and of course in your community and neighborhoods is very much appreciated. Some of you have heard me say this before, but I think it bears repeating. I do a fair bit of this kind of work, and it's my personal belief that people who like yourselves, who take time out of your busy personal and professional lives to contribute constructively to matters of civic and societal interest, are always most deserving of our gratitude and respect. So thank you again for joining us, and I look forward, as I'm sure to you, to a productive and informative session. Let me introduce myself. For those of you whom I've not yet met, my name is Glen Pache. I'm the head of a firm called GLPI, and it's my pleasure to serve this evening as the independent facilitator for the meeting. So again, it might be important for you to know that I am not an employee of the county. My role is simply to moderate tonight's event. The only bias I bring to the meeting, if I can call it a bias, is toward achieving the best result for us all, and that's what I will set out to do. So let's talk a little bit about what it is that we are up to tonight. As many of you know, the county has been experiencing a lot of use of its public river access points and related park areas. And the number of visitors to, the number of users of these locations has created some parking issues and some other challenges for local residents. And you'll hear more about this in a few minutes. But in response, and with a view to trying to balance various objectives, including the concerns of those who are living in the access areas, county staff have developed a near-term strategy for the 2021 season that includes parking initiatives and related mitigation approaches. And these build on activities that were undertaken in 2020. And again, you'll hear a lot more about this shortly. Tonight's session is about sharing the proposed river access parking system and mitigation plan for the upcoming 2021 season and answering your questions and getting your feedback on it. And our focus is on getting your value-adding comments that can help shape the best approach to use for the season, which, as you know, will be in full swing quite soon, especially as the weather begins to warm up. Now, the county team has already received a number of written submissions, and on their behalf, I will just thank all of those who sent those in. They were very much appreciated and provided some food for thought. This is a step, and I think everybody realizes this is a step in what needs to be an ongoing community dialogue and conversation. There are, in fact, other opportunities to be involved, including completing the online survey, which you can find at engagebrant.ca. Again, that's engagebrant.ca if you haven't completed the survey already. You can also provide comments through various means online and so forth. So with that as a backdrop, let's move to the session agenda, and I'll go through this quickly. First, we'll hear from County of Brant Mayor David Bailey, who will share some brief words of welcome and some contextual observations. Then we'll hear from county staff who are going to provide an overview presentation covering the locations that are the focus of the initiative, a little bit of additional context and background, including some of the mitigation measures that have already been put in place. They'll talk a bit about the purpose of the proposed plan for 2021. They'll talk about what's being proposed in that plan and beyond. We'll hear about what's next and way to stay engaged in the process and so forth. But really importantly, we don't just want to tell you stuff this evening, we also want to hear from you. And in the latter part of the session, we will be opening things up and we will focus on responding to your questions and again, hearing some of your thoughts and perspectives about what's being proposed. And more about how we'll do that, a little bit later. And we'll conclude with an overview of next steps, some closing observations from Mayor Bailey, and a formal adjournment. And we'll be looking to wrap things up around 7:30 or so. We'll see how things go. We don't want to prejudge the end time. A couple of process-related items. First of all, please note that tonight's meeting is being recorded, and that's both to document the session, but also to be able to make the content accessible to those who may not have been available this evening. We will also occasionally be using some electronic polling questions to which you are invited to respond. And again, more about that later. And by the way, if you are having any technical issues this evening, please email Gary, that's Gary, .porter, that's PORTER, @brant.ca. So again, if you have any profound technical issues, email gary.porter@brant.ca and someone will try to assist you. Now, I mentioned that we're looking to hear from the public later this evening. Depending on the number of people who are interested in sharing questions and comments in that upcoming session component, we may not get to everyone this evening. Please be assured again that there are other avenues for sharing your valued thoughts, both online and otherwise. And I know that the good people of the County of Brant share this next sentiment, and I don't even know if I need to share it, but I'll just note that the mayor and council feel very strongly about the importance of civility and respectful dialogue. And to that end, of course, and I don't imagine this would have happened anyway, but there'll be no tolerance for profanity, inappropriate language, and so forth this evening. And I'll say more later about the Zoom platform that we're using for this virtual town hall and how you can join the conversation again a little bit later. And by the way, I understand that we have, aside from the mayor, a number of our esteemed elected officials and various senior staff from the county who are joining us and observing this evening. We are very pleased to have them join us. I know that they will be keen listeners to tonight's conversation. Welcome to all, and thank you for the interest in the initiative and in your interest, Council, in the comments from the public. So I'll now invite Mayor Bailey to share some thoughts and some words of welcome, and then I'll introduce our next speakers. Welcome again, everybody. Great to have you here. Mayor Bailey, over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Glenn. As you know, you're always welcome here in the County of Brant. You seem to know so much about how we work and how we operate here in the county, and we are always very grateful for your interest in the county. Thank you to the councilors that have joined us, the ones that haven't come tonight. On behalf of my council, I'd like to welcome everyone here to the forum tonight. This is a very interesting and very unsettling topic we're going to talk about tonight. Having been raised in Glen Morris and on the river, I can't believe that we would ever need a meeting like this. I would never have believed that a circumstance would end up like this. I feel very badly for the people that are affected by the problems that we're going to talk about tonight. As I said, it must be my age showing, but I mean, as a kid, you talk to the 11 friends that you had in Glen Morris, and you certainly didn't play by the river, and you certainly didn't do any of the shenanigans that I'm watching happen at the river in Paris and in Glen Morris. And it saddens me to think that you people are being imposed upon, and your quality of life is being checkered and spotted by what's happening. And so I hope after tonight we will have some answers or some solutions or partial solutions to things that are very invasive to your lives. And I assure you that you're on the top of the list of the county's concerns, and we will come up with some answers. So thank you all for taking the time tonight, and you have to know that you're being heard at all levels of the council. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Bailey, both for the welcome to me and also the words of introduction. Much appreciated. So now, as mentioned, without further ado, we'll hear from county staff who will share an overview presentation covering the kinds of things that I mentioned earlier, an overview of the areas of focus. They'll give us a little bit of context and background. They'll talk about the proposed plan and its different elements, how to stay involved, all of that sort of stuff. And to that end, it's my pleasure to hand things over to two speakers. One is Cindy Stevenson, who is the General Manager of Community and Protective Services with the county. And Cindy, just say a quick hello so that people can put a face to the name before I introduce Greg as well.
Yep, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to the conversation.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. And we also have, again, her colleague, Greg Demers, who is the Director of Roads. Greg, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you to all our residents that have joined us tonight to make a fulsome discussion.
Thank you. So Cindy, I believe you're up first. Over to you. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Glenn. And again, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I'll just ask our colleague Gary to advance to the next slide, please. So we are very happy to have this opportunity to engage with you and solicit your feedback on the county's river access user mitigation strategy for this season. We look forward to hearing your input and have incorporated different opportunities to do so tonight. Throughout the presentation, I encourage you to participate in the polling questions that Glenn mentioned, if you're able to. And we also encourage you to provide your comments or ask questions in the Q&A portion of the evening following this presentation. Next slide, please. So the presentation tonight will include an overview of the county's 3 existing public river access points, a review of user volume at these areas, the strategies the county has enacted to date to address resident concerns, an overview of the additional proposed strategies for the 2021 season, and what the county's next steps are with respect to the proposed plan. Next slide, please. We will start tonight off with a brief overview of the county's 3 river access points, starting with Penman's Dam. Penman's Dam river access is located on Willow Street in Paris. It has been designated as a commercial river access point. Other activities such as hiking, cycling, and park use often occur in this area. There is a municipal parking lot located here with 29 parking spaces available. There is also overflow parking and washrooms available at the nearby Stel Community Center. After receiving some resident concerns last season in 2020, there will not be portable washrooms located at this park for the upcoming season, with users directed to Stel for washroom facilities. Next slide, please. Bean Park River Access is located on Spencer Street in Paris. This is designated a non-commercial access point. While a launch point, users also enjoy the park area for other recreational and leisure activities. There is a municipal parking lot at the site with 28 parking spaces available. Next slide, please. The Eric Thomlinson River Access Launch is located at Forbes Street in Glen Morris. This is also a commercial river access point. Cambridge to Paris Rail Trail access is also located at this site, attracting hikers and cyclists, as well as river users. The parking lot at this site is owned by the GRCA and has 40 parking spaces available. Next slide, please. So this brings us to our first polling question of the evening. This question we're asking, how often do you or members of your immediate family typically visit one of the County of Brant's public river access park areas during the summer months between May and October? Okay, so it looks like those who have joined us this evening very regularly use the access points, with the overwhelming majority saying more than 5 times per season. So that is great to see that people are enjoying those amenities. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide. So the next few slides will provide an idea of how the volume of users has changed from the 2019 to 2020 seasons at each of the 3 locations. In 2019, the county set up infrared counters that count activity that passes the counter at each location. It is of note that this does not indicate a specific number of people, but the number of times the counter has been passed. At Penman's Dam, the counter is set up near a location coming off the river. So the comparison here between 2019 and 2020 is fairly significant, noting that the month of August had the highest count, for a total count of just over 38,000 in 2020, compared to over 15,000 in 2019. So this is a difference of over 22,000, or 142% increase year over year. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're looking at volume of users at Bean Park. At Bean Park, the launch was closed in May of last year because the landing at Brant Park was not available at that time. So you can see there's a decrease here in counter activity year over year for the month of May. However, moving forward between June and August, the highest recorded month was August, with over 18,000 compared to over 11,000 in August of 2019. The total count at this location in 2020 was over 55,000, a 38% increase in counter activity over 2019. Next slide, please. So lastly, we're looking at volume of users at Eric Thomlinson. The user count at Eric Thomlinson also recorded the highest activity during the month of August in 2020, with over 17,000, steadily increasing month to month. The total count in 2020 was over 56,000, compared to just over 34,000 in 2019, an increase of 64% year over year. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we have our second polling question. And here we're asking our viewers, are you concerned with the number of users who visit the County of Brant's public river access park areas? And with this question, we're asking you to check all that apply. So answer A is no concerns. If you answer that, then there's no need to move on to the other options. But then there are some other options under B, C, D, and E for various reasons that you may be concerned with respect to user activity. So we'll give everybody a few moments to fill this question out. We have, let's see, about 10% saying that you don't have concerns, but the overwhelming majority have indicated that you do have concerns related to users. And there is a mix here for all the reasons that were identified. So that is very valuable information for staff and council to take back to consider. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide. So recent county river access actions. The county did receive resident concerns last year regarding users at the river access sites, and a number of steps have been taken to address them. Firstly, there is ongoing consultation and collaboration with our municipal partners, the GRCA and regional outfitters, to develop plans and tactics to improve peak demands, physical infrastructure, site maintenance, and patron safety. There were also parking lot improvements made at the 4th Street trailhead, with 9 additional spaces created following the close of last season, which was in partnership with the GRCA. Through a joint project, installation of river access kilometer markers at key landmarks, structures, and access points has taken place, as well as the launch of the communication plan to advise the public of these safety enhancement tools. There has been installation of signage where required to direct people and users to appropriate parking areas and to improve wayfinding of amenities near the access points. Following the summer of 2020, Council also adopted the Responsible Safe Visitation is Our Priority in Brant Plan, referred to as RSVP. In the report on the Visitor Impact Review, it was noted that some municipalities, specifically those with strong natural recreation assets in areas of low infection rates with respect to the pandemic, easily accessed via major routes with a strong brand of supporting amenities, reported high rates of visitation through the summer months in 2020. As part of RSVP, market engagement is a key component to convey clear messaging to visitors of Brant's expectations and better inform visitors before they arrive in Brant. For this upcoming season, all marketing with respect to river access will be restricted or adjusted to focus on other less popular destinations away from paddling, and keep any paddling marketing pointing to the commercial outfitters and away from the public launching sites of Brant. County Economic Development and Tourism staff have also initiated discussions with Grand River stakeholders, including City of Brantford Tourism, Regional Tourism Association, and Six Nations Tourism to coordinate marketing efforts and direct the flow of paddlers beyond the county's launch capacities further downriver. Next, it's noting that there is planning and construction will occur of a new river access point in the Newport area. And lastly, new parking restrictions were implemented near the Eric Thomlinson launch last season to one side of Forbes Street, Kirk Street, Princess Street, and Pine Street. The signs related to these restrictions were installed in the field just prior to the end of the season last year in anticipation for the start of the 2021 summer launch. Next slide, please. Okay, so leading up to the 2021 season, County Council were presented concerns in March from a delegation from the Eric Thomlinson launch area. Council requested that staff introduce a more appropriate parking system for the 2021 season. Staff have also been requested to look at the longer term and the potential for an e-booking parking system for the 2022 season. A staff team from various departments reviewed options for the 2021 season, taking into consideration realistic timelines for implementation. Next slide, please. So in April, the report River Access Parking System and Mitigation Plan was considered. This plan currently includes the following measures. So the first is a seasonal residential parking permit system to be introduced at each of the 3 launch areas. It was recommended that each of the 3 areas have a parking permit zone, as limits imposed on one location have the potential to impact other locations. The proposed plan also includes an investment in additional staff resources for bylaw enforcement at each of the 3 sites to educate, monitor, and enforce the new parking restrictions. Enforcement officers are planned to be stationed at each location during peak periods, including weekends. An increased fine is also proposed for those who violate the new parking restrictions from the current $30 fine to $80 if paid within 15 days of issuance. Commercial outfitters were not issued permits for use in 2020 due to concerns related to the pandemic and expected and experienced volume. It is recommended again that the public access sites are not permitted for commercial use. As noted previously, the county's RSVP strategy is already underway. So after discussion by council at the April Administration and Operations Committee, council requested public consultation on the proposed plan and deferred the plan and implementation for an additional month in order to hear from residents. Next slide, please. So the piece of the proposed plan that has generated the greatest discussion is the proposed seasonal parking permit system. The next area with the original parking restriction posed, and as part of the review, address some of the factors. One of the biggest concerns staff and council have received is the current parameters involved with the municipal parking system, notably the $15 charge per month fee. This concern was also shared by members of council when the report was presented in April. Following public feedback and as part of a follow-up report, council will be presented the option to remove any fee associated with permit parking in a river access zone. Staff are currently looking at a provision as well of 2 parking permits issued per household within the 3 zones as applied for by residents. Next slide, please. So the next 3 slides include the original proposed maps for the municipal parking permit zones. I will now turn over the presentation to my colleague, Greg Demers, our Director of Roads, to review each map in more detail.
Thank you, Cindy. And good evening, everyone. Excuse me while I make our way through this map. I'll be glancing down to look at my notes as we move our way through. What I'd like to do is just have briefly outline from a high level why we chose the roads what we did and our methodology behind it. So starting with Penman's Dam, I'll first speak to Mick Jones Way. It is a laneway, and we have proposed to make that no parking. The reason for that, the Highway Traffic Act does not allow you to park in a laneway where there's not room anyways, but we felt that we should actually post it due to if visitors are looking for parking spaces, we do not want them to block a laneway. So that would be posted. And then we make our way over to Willow Street. It's currently posted no parking, but through our Brant Safe Streets program last fall, it was identified that people using the launch were unloading right on Willow Street and causing concerns around that corner. So what we've done to enhance enforcement opportunities is to make that a no stopping zone. So that will not allow visitors to that area and river users to unload on the roadway. They will actually have to use the unloading zone that is highlighted in blue in the parking lot. So that will be your yellow orange dotted line that comes down on the west side of Willow. On the east side of Willow, you'll see the green dotted lines. We are proposing that that stays parking as it currently is. The only difference is that it would be permitted parking to ensure that the residents of the area do have parking when they come home. So moving on, we will come down. So then there's the blue dotted line, that is your unloading zone. Then we make our way through the parking lot, moving towards Elm Street. The solid red line is what is currently in place, and it is no parking on either side. Then we move in to Elm Street between the dam and William. Currently, that is alternate parking. What we've done is we've proposed that the east side of the road is made for permitted parking, and that the west side of the road is no parking to keep that available for residential use. And we felt that people coming onto Elm Street could park on the right-hand side, and instead of turning around, they can drive out, come out Willow, and then exit and enter William that way, because we'd also had concerns about added left and right hand turns on William from Elm Street. Then making our way around, coming back up to the other side of the road again, we move to Walnut. Currently, it's alternated parking. We have suggested the southwest side has more parking spaces available, so that's why we've done that. And again, that will be through permitted parking, and that will allow parking on one side of the road, which it currently is, and that will allow for more vision of the street and to keep traffic moving in a safe manner. Gary, move on to Bean Park, please. Currently, this is all alternate parking. What we'd like to do is establish that the green dotted sides becomes the permitted parking side throughout the season. You move down in towards the launch area. It is currently non-parking, no parking, and it is highlighted in the solid red line with the blue line as the loading and unloading zone. Gary, move on to slide 3, please, Forbes Court. So let's go right into Forbes Court. Forbes Court was changed last fall, as Cindy Stevenson has mentioned. On the north side of Forbes Court, it is no parking. Down along to the bottom portion where the blue is, that is the safest area for loading and unloading. Then we come back up, it's no parking, and then there's a small section for permitted parking for residents only. And then we move on to Kirk Street where it's no parking currently on the east side of the road, and then permitted parking on the west side of the road as you come around from Pine Street onto Kirk, back out to Forbes. There's no parking 9 meters either side of that intersection of Kirk and Forbes. You head in a westerly direction. The south side of Forbes will be permitted parking for residents only. And then Princess Street is no stopping. And what we and that is the north of East River. That is put in place to stop people from unloading and loading in front of the residents' homes in that area. As we move up East River, it's currently no parking along where the sidewalk section is. There was concerns brought forward to us that people were unloading and carrying equipment down equipment, devices, canoes, kayaks, inflatables down East River Road. So we've made that a prohibited no stopping zone all the way up into Glen Morris East. Coming back down on the west side portion of the road, we get to that is no stopping until we get close to address 460, and then it would be permitted parking only for the residents going towards Princess Street south of East River Road. We'll make a right onto Princess Street. It's existing parking prohibited or no parking on the west half of this road. And then permitted parking would be moved to the eastern portion of this road. If we come down to Dunbar, you can see where there's no stopping and unloading on the northern part and permitted parking on the southern part of Dunbar. Moving to Glen Morris East, between East River Road and Princess Street, you can see both sides of the road have been made no stopping, with the exception in front of the school, where loading and unloading of school children will need to take place during the week. This has all been done to stop people from unloading watercraft on people's front lawns or in the roadway where it was unsafe. All the green dotted lines are to accommodate on-street parking so that residents do have access to their home through the permit system. With that, I think that explains a lot of the questions that had come in about the mapping and what our methodology was behind it. But I could provide further comment if there was follow-up questions. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide. And that brings us to our third polling question for this evening. And in this question, we are trying to get an idea of who has joined us this evening. So we're asking if you could indicate which of the following applies to you and to select one of these options. So we are asking viewers whether or not you reside in one of the proposed parking permit areas, whether or not you are a county resident, or if you live outside of the County of Brant. We have a mix here with us tonight. Some residents who do live within the proposed areas, but quite a few residents have joined us who live outside of the proposed areas. So, and then a few as well who live outside of the County of Brant, but the majority with us tonight are County of Brant residents. Okay. So we'll move on to the next slide, which is our final polling question for the evening. And we're asking everyone who's joined us, do you believe it is important for some variation of a parking permit system to be in place for the 2021 season? And it's just a simple yes or no answer. For those of us who have joined us tonight, I can see that the majority are supportive or believe that there should be some variation of a parking permit system for this season. So that is quite valuable information for staff and council to take back and consider when this report comes forward at the end of the month. Okay, so we'll go on to the next slide, please. So the 2021 proposed strategy, next steps. So following tonight's session, your comments and questions will be considered regarding the original proposal as presented this evening. And a report will be considered, as I just mentioned, at the May 25th council meeting to decide on the 2021 strategy going forward. Should the county proceed with a parking permit plan, the implementation target will be July 1st. And this is in order to get the signage in place and issue the permits to residents living within these areas. The strategy would then be monitored throughout the 2021 season, and the county will continue to monitor public feedback received through Engage Brant to evaluate its success. Next slide, please. So Brant River access long-term considerations. As noted, with the increasing popularity of these sites, the county does recognize a long-term strategy and solutions need to be considered. As we monitor the 2021 season, further consideration will be given to a different type of permit system for 2022, such as a municipal lot permit parking, as well as a look at other effective solutions that may be out there that other communities could have implemented that were facing similar issues. And next slide, please. So the county has a new public engagement tool, and likely many of you have already visited this. It is engagebrant.ca, as Glenn mentioned earlier, to provide your thoughts and opinions on a variety of county projects. Currently, there is a specific page for river access, which includes previous council reports, the maps that were shown earlier this evening and reviewed by Greg Demers, as well as
Cindy,
Yep.
Sorry to jump in. I think we might be one slide behind, or at least I'm seeing the slide about there we go. Now we've got the engagement one up. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. So on this slide, it does note how to access engagebrant.ca. The address is there. noting that there is a survey there as well, which is open to May the 16th to participate in. Feedback may also be sent to an email address that has been set up for this topic, riveraccess@brant.ca. And I'd just like to thank everyone again who has joined tonight to learn more about the county's proposed plan and to provide your comments, questions, and suggestions. I'll now turn things back over to Glen, who will facilitate the next portion of our meeting to hear your questions and your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy and Greg, for the informative presentation. Cindy, just before I let you and Greg go, not that you're going to leave the meeting, of course, can you just reiterate what you said earlier about residents and the parking permits and where you were moving with regard to requiring payment, or in this case, not requiring payment for them? Could you just cover that again for everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I noted in the presentation, we have heard a lot of concerns about the proposed fee, and that fee is coming from the municipal parking permit system that already is in place. But there is an ability for council, when this plan is considered again, to remove that fee. And I know we heard from council at the previous meeting when the report was discussed, their concerns on charging residents for the parking permits. So there will be an option for council to remove that fee. Staff are also looking at the distribution of the permits. And at this point, our suggestion is that residents that live within these areas be issued up to 2 permits per household based on an application. So they would fill out an application that would go to our staff and then be issued the permits accordingly.
Great. Thanks again for covering that, Cindy. So it's time to hear from the participants in this meeting. That is our community members, members of the public, and so forth. Just before we do so, let me quickly introduce the panel who are available to both respond to your questions and your comments. They are all staff members with the County of Brant. Again, as I introduce them, I'll ask them to say a quick hello so that you can put a face to the name. This is useful if you've got the Zoom platform in speaker view so that they'll show up when they're speaking. You've already met Cindy Stevenson. You've already met Greg Demers. We also have Kathy Ballantyne, who is the Director of Parks and Facilities. Kathy, do you want to say a quick hello?
Yes, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to hearing what you have to give us your feedback on tonight, and hopefully we can get some of the issues resolved. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kathy. And we also have Greg Bergeron, who is the Manager of Enforcement and Regulatory Services. Greg?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very happy to have receive your input. We know that we're looking for solutions as well, and thanks for joining us.
Great, thank you, Greg. So let me quickly outline how you can share your questions, comments, and views. I know that some of you are expert users of Zoom. You've been in these kinds of meetings hundreds of times, while others may be much less familiar with the platform and in fact may be using it just for the very first time this evening. So I need to provide a few technical details, so bear with me. If you would like to share a question or a comment, and if you've joined by a computer or a tablet or a smartphone with screen capability, you can raise your hand electronically by clicking the raise hand button that is typically found at the bottom of your screen. Most of you will find it there. This may vary depending on your device and whether you've accessed the meeting using either the full Zoom program, the app, or the browser. But in order to see the raised hand function, some of you may have to hover, that is your cursor, should hover over the bottom of the Zoom screen and click on the participants button. a participants window should open to the right of your screen. And then at the bottom of this window, you should see a raise hand button. So again, click this if you want to get into the queue to join the discussion. You might also find the raise hand button under the reactions icon. So for some of you, you may find it there. And if you've joined us tonight by using a simple telephone, okay, again, this is a simple telephone that is not web enabled, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. So again, if you want to get into the queue to share a question or comment and you're using a simple non-web enabled phone, you can press *9 to get into the conversation. Depending on how many people want to speak, the technical manager from the county may be randomly selecting every nth raised hand and inviting those individuals to share their questions and comments. And that kind of randomized approach helps ensure an unbiased approach to speaker selection. When it's your turn to speak, we will say your screen name and we will invite you to share the comment or question. At that point, you should get a prompt, and the prompt will be something like the host would like to unmute you. When that happens, simply click unmute and your microphone will be turned on and we should be able to hear what you have to say. You can leave your camera off to preserve bandwidth and to keep the meeting moving smoothly. Again, if you are on a phone, you can't press a button to mute or unmute. What you can do is press *6. So again, *9 if you're on the phone to raise your hand electronically, *6 to mute and to unmute if you're on the phone. And again, if you are selected to speak, be sure to enable your own microphone. And I don't mean simply muting and unmuting. If you haven't in your settings, for example, on a laptop, enabled your mic to be used, we may not be able to hear you. So I just caution you on that front. Once you've shared your thoughts, you will be remuted by the technical team and you'll be returned to being a meeting attendee so that you can continue to be a part of the session. And please lower your hand once you've asked your question. If you lose the connection or we are unable to hear you, we will be moving to the next participant. So we invite you to reconnect using the Zoom link and or the telephone number provided. And again, if you're having any major technical issues, please email gary.porter@brant.ca. And again, my apologies, we may not get to everyone this evening. I see there's a whole bunch of hands that are already up. We will try to get to a bunch of you in the next 40 minutes or so. Again, we're looking to wrap up around 7:30. So let's move to hearing from some of you who have raised your hands. I'll ask respectfully if you can be concise. We want to ensure that we can hear from as many people as possible within tonight's time frame. And I'll invite you to quickly introduce yourselves and or your locations if you're comfortable sharing that. And again, I know the good people of the County of Brant want to have a respectful and meaningful conversation, and I'm sure that that will be the case. So just sort of randomly selecting people, I'm seeing, and I'm just going to go by the screen names here. So some of them are, actual names of people, some of them aren't. But the first person I'm seeing here is Laura Schutz. And I'm going to ask our technical manager to unmute Laura. And Laura, if you would make sure that you unmute yourself, and please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Can you hear me talking?
We can, yes. Thank you, Laura. Go ahead, please.
Perfect, thanks. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, because right now it sounds like the proposed solution to the parking problems is to remove the majority of street parking. So only those who live on those streets can actually park there. But those of us who don't live on Willow or William, for example, or around Bean Park, can no longer actually use those parking spots on any of those surrounding streets. So that's my question, is first of all, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, and then follow that with a statement that this to me, to be honest, does not seem like a solution to the parking problem. I'm quite worried it's actually only going to amplify the problem because you're taking away so many parking spaces from those of us who don't live directly in those neighborhoods.
Okay, so let's thank you, Laura. Let's start with the first part of your question. So I'll ask Cindy and or Greg Demers to jump in. So has Laura got it right that we are removing parking spots from the equation? And secondly, is that going to exacerbate the problem? And how's that going to help? Cindy, Greg, go ahead.
Cindy, would you like me to field this one?
Thanks,
Cindy, I think yeah, go ahead. I think you were muted. Go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I had an issue with that, a technical difficulty there. So I can start off and then maybe I'll turn it over to you, Greg. Laura's question about, or clarification on the proposed, I guess, parking permit area is correct in that the zones that were outlined through the mapping by Greg, it would only be the residents who would be issued permits in the proposed strategy that could park on those particular streets. And, you know, in addition to that, that would then, you know, if there were residents who normally park on those particular streets, they would need to park, you know, on adjacent streets or find a parking spot within the current municipal parking lots that are in those areas. And I'll turn it over to Greg in case he has any additional thoughts or comments on that.
Oh, I think you got it well covered, Cindy. The only thing I would like just to highlight is we're actually not removing available parking spaces because it is alternate parking. So it's one parking on either side of the road at any given one time. The only difference is, yes, it will, for anyone visiting the area, they will not be able to park in those parking spots because they will be permitted to the local residents of that street.
Thank you, and thank you again for the first question. By the way, everybody, if you're wondering, we've got about 85, 90 people who are participating tonight as actual attendees. There's another, 10 or so who are part of the group that you're listening to. So that's a great number. It shows a lot of interest in this topic. And again, we thank all of you for joining us. So next person up that I saw with their hand raised is, and again, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing any of these monikers, but it's R Press. So if we can bring R Press into the conversation, we'll unmute you. And if you could unmute yourself, and please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So my question probably as a segue from Laura's, how do we as residents allow for guests to park?
Okay, so let's get, I don't know, again, Greg, if you or Cindy want to jump in on that one. So how do those who live in these areas account for and make space for guests who may be visiting them?
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you for the question. So we've seen some feedback around this concern already come through engagebrant.ca. We've had a bit of discussion about it amongst ourselves as staff. At this point, we talked about how many permits per household might make sense, and we've arrived at 2. Noting some of these areas, there are driveways available so that if you do have guests, your cars may need to move to the street and guests may need to park in the driveways. There could be some other solutions as well, or exceptions, an exception process looked at if this is a really prevalent concern, to see how the county may accommodate that.
Thanks, Cindy. So next up, I'm seeing Raza and Charles. So Raza and Charles, if you would be so kind as to unmute, we'll get you into the conversation, and please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Hello. Can you hear
Hello,
me?
yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
As someone who lives on the other side of the river in an old house, I want to follow up on Laura Schutz's that we do use the river, and in fact, we usually launch close to our house there. But I have arthritis. I may want to come down and take a walk on the rail trail. If these permits are only on the weekend, that's fine. I can do it on a weekday. But I want to be able to park in that area. And also, I'm very concerned, will it become impossible for people who don't live in that permit area to park for events at the community hall or at the school?
Thank you. And again, forgive me, I don't know if it's Raza or Reza, but thank you for the
Rasa,
question.
it's Rasa.
Rasa. I didn't have it right either time. Thank you, Rasa. So Cindy, Greg, go ahead, please.
Sure, thanks, Glenn, and thank you for the question, Raza. So again, under the proposed plan, there are the municipal lots where visitors can park, but within this proposed plan, only those that have a permit, which would be residents who live in those zones, could park on the street. We did receive, and it sounds like you are from the Glen Morris area, Eric Thomlinson launch. We have received through Engage Brand and some other avenues, some concerns around the zone that's been identified and some of the streets that may be impacted and how that maybe have an impact on the church, the community center, which may, if under normal circumstances, may be running church services or events and do use overflow parking onto the streets. So staff and council will be looking at those concerns that have come in and potentially making some recommended adjustments or amendments to those areas within that area in the Eric Thomlinson zone. So that those types of facilities that do require street parking wouldn't be impacted by this plan.
Thanks, Cindy. I'll also just remind everybody, you can do more than share questions. If you have some value-adding suggestions about how staff's recommendations might be modified, refined, enhanced, changed in some way, I know they would be more than willing to entertain those. So feel free to offer some of those value-adding suggestions as well. But next up is Chris Wiley and/or Cheryl Kernigan. So whenever you're ready, we will unmute you. And if you could unmute yourself and go ahead, please. Chris or Cheryl or?
Yeah, it's Chris Wiley here.
Great, we can hear you now. We couldn't for a moment. Go ahead, Chris, thank you.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So I think my question might go to Greg Bergeron, the bylaw manager, and I'm worried about, from time to time, we have seen overnight people or people parking overnight, and does the permit system take that into account? Also, if you live on a short street with only, say, top to bottom, maybe 15 parking spots, how are you going to prioritize that you ensure the homeowner has a spot there? And also, my employer affords me the use of a service vehicle from time to time. Have you engaged employers with this permit thing? Like, am I going to have to pay for that service vehicle, or will I get that back from my employer somehow? And I would just like to conclude with just a brief statement that I'm talking about the Bean Park area, and we consider this in our immediate neighborhood to be a neighborhood park. And it discourages me a little bit to see that Brant Tourism promotes it so widely. because it is a small, quiet, green space. And what we saw last summer completely distracts from that. So thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thank you, Chris, for sharing your questions and your comment as well. So let's get Greg Bergeron up on this one. So Chris had a few questions. One was, how do you handle people who may be parking overnight? He also had a question about, what do you do for homeowners who may have multiple vehicles, and how do they find a spot? And if you have a service vehicle or a company vehicle of some kind, who's responsible for securing that permit for that vehicle? So Greg, jump in, please.
Thank you, Glenn. Chris, thank you for the question. For part one of the question related to the time, we've had some discussions among staff internally, and we've come to the consensus, which may be a recommendation. It may require further investigation and discussion, and obviously analyzing what's happened tonight with the consultation. But we're discussing limiting some of the times where these permits are active. One of the times that we have discussed would be possibly around 7 p.m., where the restrictions would kick in, let's say between 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. daily. After that, the regular provisions of parking would apply. So that's part one. What was part two, Glenn?
Well, there was a question about what happens for a homeowner who might have multiple vehicles. Will they have a spot for parking? And thirdly, what if there's a service vehicle?
Right. So we can't guarantee a spot, unfortunately, and this was part of the basis of, you know, why we discussed, you know, how many permits are we going to give. We're kind of banking on the information that not everybody is going to require on-street parking at the same time. So we've limited it to 2. Obviously, you know, that's up for further discussion depending on the feedback. But that certainly is, you know, where we're going in that direction right now. As for service vehicles, again, it would be on a first come, first served basis. Again, it would fall under the provisions that we would be issuing 2 permits per household.
Greg, there was also a question, some people have sent them in through alternate means, but they were wondering, when would enforcement begin, and what are the consequences for those that refuse to pay their fines? How do you enforce that?
Well, the fines basically go into default. So there is some provisions under the Municipal Act and the Provincial Offences Act where, you know, the funds would be collected. And we, as we mentioned in the report, we are looking at increasing the fine structure as a deterrent for people to park in these permit zones. So there's definitely mechanisms in place that will ensure that we do get collections of those fines.
Thank you. And one more before we go back to our callers and our meeting participants. There was a question around the number of vehicles that a household might have. So somebody's saying, you know, we may have 3 or 4 cars that are, you know, belong to our address. And I guess Cindy or Greg had said earlier that you were looking at giving each household 2 permits, and people are wondering, why are they restricted to only 2 permits when they have more, when they may have more than that number of vehicles? So I don't know if that's the other Greg or Cindy or whoever wants to jump in on that one.
I can speak to that, Glenn.
Okay.
We've basically looked at the streets that we're dealing with, and we want to make sure that there's enough parking for everyone. You know, so we've had to limit the amount of parking permits that, you know, we're going to issue just to ensure that everybody does have a parking space in case they need it. And it would be on a first come, first served basis. We wouldn't intend on, you know, assigning spots for people to park in front of their residence necessarily. So they may have to, you know, park a few houses down depending on the demand at that time.
Okay, thank you, Greg. So let's go back to our participants. The next up I see is someone or an organization with the label Simply Grand. So if we can promote them into the conversation, and if you could unmute yourself and introduce yourself and go ahead whenever you're ready, Simply Grand.
Hi.
Hello.
My concern is that I actually live on William Street, and it's been an issue for quite some time. People not stopping at the four-way stop to a complete stop. And when I'm at the front of my house, because the washrooms now are going to be at Stel, people barely make it across that street. Cars are honking and cursing at people crossing the street. I'm just wondering what safety measures we could put in place for that.
Okay, thank you, Simply Grand. So maybe I'll go back to Greg Demers. Have you looked at any of those safety-related issues in that area? Is there anything you're thinking about or could do there? Go ahead, Greg.
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. We are actually looking into it and have looked into it many times. And the resident that was just speaking is aware that the William Willow intersection is very busy, and then so is the William at Grand River Street intersection, extremely busy. So we're trying to look at what controls we can put in the area that make best sense, where we don't have people jackrabbiting or jumping from stop sign to stop sign, and that when traffic does back up, it doesn't queue into the middle of these intersections, then gridlocking all traffic movement, which is not what we want. And this is currently being looked at by our traffic specialist. And one thing we'd like to keep in people's mind is not always installing a stop sign is the safest measure. So, but I do understand. So I'd like to work a little bit more with Kathy Ballantyne and her group to see how many pedestrians are actually crossing at that intersection, to see if the warrants are met and what type of proactive approaches we can put in place to get people moving safely across the road.
Great, thank you.
I hope that
Kathy,
answers the question.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Kathy, anything you'd like to add quickly?
No, there's nothing further at this time, but we are aware of the situation, and we are trying to direct traffic to the intersection rather than jaywalking, if you want to call it that, across from Elm Street. So signage is directing people to go down that side. So that's our strategy at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. So let's go to our next participant. Again, forgive my pronunciation. Is it Kim Sinky? Sink? I'm not sure. Anyway, we will unmute you and go ahead, Kim, whenever you're ready.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Thank you so much. I live just down the street from Bean Park, and my question does not pertain to parking, but rather the environmental considerations of the increased volume of river users. So I'd like to know if the county has considered any strategies to help mitigate the increased level of litter and garbage produced by the increased volume of river users. And if they have not, what can I do to help ensure that this is something that is being talked about and considered?
Great, thank you, Kim. So who's best to respond to this question about the environmental considerations, the litter, the pollution, and what might be done to mitigate or eliminate that? Kathy, did you want to jump in?
Yes, thanks, Glenn, and thank you for the question. It is definitely a concern. We do have increased staffing that goes to the sites, particularly on weekends when the volume is higher normally than during the weekdays, to attend to as much garbage removal as possible. And obviously our kind of our social media campaigns are also trying to get people to engage in their activities in a responsible manner. So we do promote that as well. It isn't something that, the river itself is not something that's really within our jurisdiction. However, we do obviously encourage a lot of cleanup type activities, and there have been groups in the past that have really assisted with that. So we certainly help facilitate those events as well.
Thanks, Kathy. I mentioned questions are coming in through and have come in through a variety of means. Someone's asking a foundational and fundamental question, and Cindy, I don't know if it's best goes to you or to someone else, but they're asking, why is there a commercial access or activity operating on a residentially zoned street in the first place? Anybody want to tackle that one?
So thanks for the question, Glenn. And I am newer to this issue than I know my colleague Kathy Valentine. But I do understand that this was historically set up at 2 of the locations for commercial river access. And I think Kathy can probably provide some more background around that.
Thanks, Cindy. Yes, you are correct that there has been quite a bit of history at these sites. The Penman's Dam site in particular, because of the dam, you really have to have an egress place for safety. And there are many people that launch upriver as far as Kitchener, Cambridge area, and can come down to Paris in one day. So there's quite often different outfitters that may be involved with picking up and dropping off. That has been really the location that has happened at for many years, and some of the outfitters have their own locations and use these ones as well. These are areas that we have had traditional usage of. This past couple of years, we have seen extraordinary growth in the general public side of things. So that is one of the recommendations, is that we cease the commercial access at this time at these sites because of the usage. So, those are things that will happen. The Bean Park in the past was a commercial site that was removed several years ago. And then the Forbes Street site, there is currently, as far as I know, 1, maybe 2 operators that do use that on occasion to work with the clients that would like to go on that part of the river. And I will add that, in some cases, this actually reduces parking because they are carpooling basically to another location and being shuttled and then dropped off, and then they get picked up in Paris again. So that's kind of the history, just to give you a bit more information.
Great, thanks, Kathy. And thank you, everyone, for the very insightful questions and comments. Let's keep them coming. Let's go to our next participant, who I'm seeing as Karen Murray Hoff. We will promote you into the conversation, Karen, and whenever you're ready, please unmute and go ahead. Karen, are you there? We're seeing you as still being muted on our end. If you could unmute your microphone, Karen. I'm going to see if our technical manager can try to unmute you on his end. But Karen, we are still seeing that your microphone is muted, and we will not be able to hear you until it's unmuted. We still cannot hear you. Let's try for maybe, I hate to lose you, Karen. Let's try for another 5 or 10 seconds. Oh, there, we're seeing you unmute. Oh, Karen, are you there now?
I am. Sadly, I'm sorry. I was writing a little message, and at the same time you asked me to unmute, so it messed everything up, I think. Anyway.
Well, we're glad to get you in. Go ahead, Karen.
Probably I have more questions than can possibly be answered. We live on Forbes Street down at the very end, which was interestingly referred to as Forbes Court tonight. I'll go for the name change. Anyway, we noticed on the one map that at the very end where we live, there is loading, unloading has been approved from our property, which is 22 Forbes Street, right over to the parking lot access. There is also an emergency access right in front of our property. People do unload. We are not allowed to park there. It is a no parking zone, and seems to remain a no parking zone even for residential parking. Anyway, it needs to at the very least be moved over. I would prefer to say there is no loading or unloading in this area. I think the feeling on this street, this tiny dead-end little residential street, is that when the parking lot is full, it is full. If you have come to hike or bike or canoe or whatever you're planning to do, which is wonderful. We have never been against any of that. but that when you come to park, that is the area you use, and there is no other area. When it's done, it's done. And so I guess I'm just asking for consideration.
Okay. Thank you, Karen. I'm glad we were able to get you in. And let me look to the county. Who wants to jump in? Any comments about the points made about loading and unloading areas and the emergency access? And once the parking's full, it's full in and around Forbes? Anybody?
I can speak to that, Glenn, if you wish. Thanks, Karen. Yes, you're correct. The unloading zone is there, and it is currently no parking in front of that. And I think our thought process is there's probably enough room for maybe 3 vehicles at the end of the street there to unload if perchance the parking lot is full, and just for ease to not carrying things as far for certain individuals that may have concerns doing so. But the signage would be indicated the specific area between where that unloading is to be occurring. So probably just to the, leave a lane for the emergency access, but then they could unload 2 or 3 cars at the end there. That's what we're thinking, just to keep it safe so people aren't trying to unload on East River Road or unsafe areas. Now that the parking lot has been widened, we think that there might be some opportunity to have a little bit more space to do that within the parking area as well.
Thanks, Kathy. There's another question that's come in again through an alternate means. Somebody is asking whether you have considered an option to dedicate a time frame for the parking permit system. And they've given as an example, maybe parking permits only between 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. Is that something that the county has looked at? Is that a possibility, an option? Maybe one of the Gregs or Cindy wants to jump in on this one, whomever.
I can jump in on this, Glenn. Thank you for the question. And we have seen that feedback come in and have discussed it as well. And we do think that it is a good suggestion. So we'll likely present that back as an option to council when the next report comes forward. And, at this point, we were looking at times where there's heavier use. Sometime between possibly 8 a.m. and 7 p.m., somewhere around that time frame is what we were looking at.
Thank you. And Tricia, I think, is the next participant that wants to get into the conversation. We'll unmute you, Tricia. And if you could unmute yourself and go ahead whenever you're ready. Tricia, we're still seeing you as being muted. Again, you'll need to unmute so that we can hear you. There, you should be good to go now. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Great, we can hear you.
Great. I'm both live in the proposed area, and I'm also an avid kayaker on the river, and I've seen the massive increase, mainly at the Glen Morris launch, and a little bit more so on the Penman Dam there as well. To kind of jump in on Diane's comment from earlier, something, does need to happen at the Elm Street and William Street there. It is concerning seeing different people trying to cross. I know that it was mentioned going up to the crosswalk or up to the 4-way stop there, which a lot of people do not use, signage or no signage. The other thing I had too was a couple different questions was, does the county have other spots that they could open up as launches, as parking lots along the river? As well as, I had this all written down. Have we looked at also how many of these residents are actually going down into our town to do shopping and such? Because mostly what I have seen last year as a kayaker and using all 3 of the launches is that it's a party. People are going out to party on the river, and like other comments have been made, there's garbage being left and whatnot. And I think what we need to more look at is something that's more respectful for our community and the river, which might have to obviously be joined in with the GRCA. So it's not just the parking, but it's other factors that are going into this too. People are just looking for a good time on the river. It's cheap, it's free, and that's what they're looking for. They come, they leave a mess, they go. My husband and I have actually had to put out a fire. We had no cell reception, and we found a fire on one of the islands, and there was nobody we could call because we had no cell reception. You know, we're constantly picking up beer cans and such. So, you know, I think that needs to be looked at as a whole with that parking situation, is that we need to look at the people that are coming to the community, not just the parking issue.
Right. Thank you, Tricia. And thank you for serving as a volunteer firefighter for the county as well. Much appreciated. I'm glad you were able to help out in that regard. So let me come back to one of Tricia's early questions, and I'll put it to the county folks. Are there other new access spots or points that we might consider using? And certainly, I think we all agree with what Tricia has said about we need to mutually be more respectful, not only of the river and the environment, but of the surrounding neighborhoods and residents. But are there any other new access points or spots that you're looking at?
I can
Kathy,
speak to that if you like, Glenn.
Yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
Thanks for the question, Tricia. This has been an ongoing debate for many, many years. The county has looked at lots of different sites. Unfortunately, we don't own any property that is developable that would be usable from a user perspective along the kind of Glen Morris to Brantford section at the moment. We are looking at developing a new river access point in the Newport area that would go down towards Chiefswood Park. And we're hoping that some people would like to try a different section of the river. And we are developing that site currently. And we're hoping that will be built later this summer. Additionally, we are always, when new developments or applications are coming in, we're always looking for potential to develop sites. Those are very limited because of topography along the river, and but we are definitely always pursuing them if we can. There really hasn't been anything that's been viable that has been supported to this date by council or is viable from a staff perspective to develop.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. And by the way, everybody, I know we're at about 7:25, starting to bump up against 7:30. That was our potential end time. I'm going to respectfully ask if we could beg your indulgence, if you have the time and inclination, that we'll go for maybe an extra 10, 15 minutes or so. I know we got a few more people who have raised hands. I'd like to get them in. We have some other questions that have come in through alternate means, and we'll want to give the mayor an opportunity to share some thoughts at the end. So let's see if we can shoehorn a few more things in before we wrap up tonight. And I'm going to go to the next person I see as a participant who wants to get into the conversation, and it looks like it's either Adam and or Laura. So we will promote you in if you'd be so kind as to unmute so that we can hear you. And whenever you're ready, go ahead, please.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. So my question, I think, is mainly for Greg of the Roads Department.
Okay.
And I am the third William Street resident that you're going to hear from in the last few minutes. I'd like to just add my support to the fact that the pedestrian situation is extremely dire. And if you do go up to the stop sign, you have to cross through 5 crosswalks to get from one side of William Street to the other because of all the turning lanes. So it's really not a safer option than people just trying to jump across the road. But my main question is, the William Street parking is not included in the proposed permit plan that I saw. And since the Elm Street parking will be permitted and the Willow Street parking will be permitted, the few spaces that are on William Street, I imagine will just become rammed by everybody who's trying to find a parking spot. And that's only, 30 feet or so away from the permit area. I'm wondering, what was the thought process on leaving William Street out of the restrictions, not because I necessarily want it restricted, but it feels very unsafe to funnel all of the parking onto the street, which, as everybody is very familiar, is already, the increasing traffic is so dangerous on this street. And then also, what are the proposed traffic safety measures you have in place or you're planning for when all that parking is filled up? And then two things: one, the sight lines for people turning out of Elm Street on either side, from the Stel side or the dam side onto William Street, and the decreased lanes with the ever increasing amount of traffic on the streets there.
Okay, thank you. There was a lot there, and I know you put it to Greg Demers, so we'll get Greg in. So just to recap quickly, there were some comments and questions about the safety measures that might be put in place, not only to protect pedestrians, but also dealing with some of the ingress and egress from the site, so how we get in and out of it. And then there was also a question about William Street and why it's not included, and might it become overrun with those who choose to try to park there. Greg, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so to speak to the safety of crossing William Street, I do agree that if you're trying to cross at an uncontrolled intersection, your risks of conflict increase, definitely. That's why, through Kathy's suggestion, it is, you do have to cross those 5 lanes and those turning lanes, but that is a 4-way stop there, so that we hope that people will use the stop sign, stop, and then pedestrians can cross accordingly. The only thing is, it is the path of least resistance to cross at Elm, to come down that way. So that's why we are looking at it. I can't commit to this at this point, what we're going to implement there, but we are looking at some things. To increase visibility, that's why we have restricted parking on one side of the road, so that roads are a little more open and that you are able to see as you approach corners. Corners, through the Highway Traffic Act, you should not be parking within 9 meters of an intersection anyways. And we will monitor that situation going forward. And I think the third part of your question, Laura, was William Street and why it was not identified in the parking restrictions. We thought, I think our group thought here was that road was so close to Syste. Why would people park there when they could just park in a parking lot and then walk to the landing or to the launch?
Okay, thanks, Greg. And again, thank you for the questions. So I've got 2 more people who have their hands raised. I'm going to go to Ida Groot in a moment, or it's Ida Groot, I'm not sure. And then I'll go to Mima next, so you're on deck. And then we'll put a few more questions to the panel that have come in writing. And we don't have time to go through all of them, like there's a bunch of them. Be assured that county staff will they'll document all of those and be aware of them, but we won't get to all of them tonight, as I mentioned. But I think next up was Ida Groot, and go ahead whenever you're ready. And again, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that.
You pronounce it just fine. It's an L, not an I, but that doesn't really matter.
Thank you.
I live in Glen Morris, in the area of discussion. I have 2 questions. Why does the parking need to be permitted for 7 days a week? We know that the biggest problem is on the weekends. So if you left the weekdays alone, the school wouldn't be affected and people's lives wouldn't be affected quite as much. And why should the residents have to apply for their permits? Why can't they just be given them because they live here?
Okay, let's get some answers to those. So first of all, why 7 days a week? Why not just on the weekends? And then secondly, why do residents have to apply for the permits? Who's up on those?
I can respond to those, Glenn, and thank you for your questions. So the first one was with respect to permitting the 7 days a week. And that was proposed, given, I think, the feedback that we've heard and seen from residents and some staff is that it can be quite busy during weekdays. But you know, I think what you've said here is it's most busy on the weekends. But our feedback is that it is busy enough through those 7 days to have the permit system in place. With respect to the application for the permits, you know, again, that's something that we've discussed as staff, and as Greg Bergeron mentioned earlier, I think the thought is that not every resident would actually require permits because of the number of vehicles they have, because of the driveway space that they might have, and there is only so much parking space available. So that is why we're suggesting the application process.
Thanks, Cindy. So next up is Mima. Mima, go ahead as soon as you're ready, if you'd kindly unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. I just wanted to echo some of the thoughts. I think it was Laura, the very first commenter, and then it kind of was a theme. But I completely understand the immediate residents' concerns of you know, all the traffic and parking in front of their houses. However, respectfully, we all are Brant residents as well, and just giving them the permits takes it away from us, and we can't get in there. Is there any solution that we could look at that somehow gives Brant County residents priority over tourists? Whether there's a permitting option for us to get occasional, you know, so many days a year that we can use it, or there's a lottery, or there's some permits for certain lots that are just for us. And I mean, the other thing is, like, I'm assuming these residents have driveways, and some people mentioned I have more cars than permits. I mean, to me, that's what I'm thinking. Do they all need to have, is it only just for them? Can we not get in somehow and enjoy, you know, we pay taxes in this county too, and we'd like to be able to use that, and we're feeling like it's being taken away from us, and we're being treated the same as a visitor from outside of the county.
Thanks, Mima. So let's, maybe Kathy, you're best to jump in on this, but it might be somebody else. What about this notion of giving some kind of, you know, preferential treatment to residents over tourists or visitors from outside the county? Is that something that you've looked at, some kind of system that might work in that regard?
As far as the parking goes, we haven't really considered that at this time, but it is a good question to pose to us, that we could possibly consider some type of system for that. Really what this is going to come down to probably is in the 22 season, where we may institute permits to use the launches, and that way that could be controlled as to how many people can go to a site on a certain day. I guess my only advice would be get to the launch, you know, between 9 and 10 in the morning, and you're more apt to get a parking space. If you wait till 11 or 12, it will be full by that time. So it really is about planning and trying to get as many people into the lots as we can at certain times of the day.
Thanks, Kathy. So let's quickly spin through a few other questions that people have submitted. And again, I'll ask our panelists to be as concise and succinct as possible, because we'll look to wrap up in the next, 5 or 10 minutes or so. But somebody has a finance-related question. They're wondering, if we're not going to charge a fee to the local residents for the permits, then when is the estimate, or where is the estimated $70,000 in bylaw enforcement going to come from? Where's, how's that cost going to be funded? And they're wondering if it's going to be from general taxes. Anybody want to jump in on that one?
I will jump in there, Glenn. So the fee for the bylaw enforcement staff would come from the current operational budget. We do have some funding available through COVID relief, where some of this may be funded from, given that I think there's a good argument that can be made that the volume in users that we're seeing is attributed somewhat to the pandemic, as we've seen through the presentation tonight. So there'll be a combination between the current budget as well as possible funding.
And then there are some questions around why you wouldn't give residents some extra visitor passes. It could be somebody visiting them who needs a parking spot. It could be for a tradesperson or somebody who's making a delivery, you know, over a prolonged period of time, whatever it might be. Is that something you've thought about, giving visitor passes to residents that they could distribute as needed to those who might need some of the spots?
Yeah, so that's a common question I think that we've seen come in over the last couple of days. And I think, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we could look at maybe methods of exceptions for certain circumstances where we would issue a visitor pass or something of that nature that may accommodate a situation like that.
And there is another side to that. Some people have written in that, you know, how do you demonstrate need? If having guests is need, then, you know, doesn't everyone have a demonstrated need? Like, there could be all kinds of different ways of doing that. Is that something you've taken into consideration?
Yeah, so the report does refer to that. That went to council back in April. And it's based on the current municipal parking permit system that the county has. But, you know, I think what we've expressed tonight is we have heard the concerns around that and are looking at how we may shift away from that demonstrated need to more so, you know, 2 permits may be issued per household. Possibly a visitor permit as well. But it would have to be applied for. So there may not be, you know, in the application form, it may not be as so many requirements as there currently stands for the existing system in place.
And there have been some questions both tonight, and I know they were in the online comments on the online form as well. People are wondering how you're going to accommodate parking around things like the library, the religious institutions, the community halls, and so forth, where there might be significant gatherings that bring a lot of vehicles to that location. How are you looking, or how is the county proposing to address those issues?
Yeah, and we've heard that come in as well. And I think there may be a couple of different options available for staff and council to consider. One being scaling back the current plan that is proposed for specifically the Eric Thomlinson area, and potentially removing some of the proposed restrictions in place that might impact some of those facilities. The other option may be, you know, looking at issuing specific permits to some of those facilities where they could issue them to facility users to park on the street. So we're looking at a couple of different options to address that.
Okay, and last question, because again, I want to be respectful of people's time. Some are wondering why you don't institute what they've referred to as a pay-to-play system. So requiring the outfitters or their clients, their patrons, to pay, you know, fees to use the different sites and to park and so forth, and that would help to fund the additional enforcement and the program that the county's looking to put into play. Is that something that you've considered?
So I'm not sure whether or not that's been considered in the past. But, you know, as we touched on this evening, we are looking at long-term strategies to address this, noting that, you know, what we're seeing is just an increase in use year over year over year. So that may be something that we'd give a closer look at. whether it's, a requirement to pay for river permits or parking in the lots nearby themselves. There could be other options as well that we look at implementing in the longer term.
Okay, and once more, Cindy, just because we're seeing more questions about this again, I don't know if some people joined us in progress and missed it, or if it just, again, hasn't been crystal clear. Can you one more time reiterate what you said about the parking permit fees for residents and the ability to go forward with the recommendation that council can consider not to make use of those? Can you cover that one more time for us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, residents have seen in the original plan or proposed plan that the current system in place does have a $15 permit fee per month. Both council and staff have heard many concerns around that. And our plan is to bring forward a recommendation to council to remove that fee so that residents would not be required to pay for a permit that live within these proposed zones.
Thank you. And I'll just remind staff, I know there are more questions and comments that we did not get to this evening. Make sure that you cut and paste those and save all of them. We don't want to lose those as part of the conversation tonight. And again, be assured that county staff will have a look at them. So just before I invite the mayor to jump back in, Cindy, did you want to say anything else by way of reiterating next steps and where things go from here?
Yeah, sure. So again, I really like to thank you, Glenn, for facilitating our session this evening. And thank all of our counselors who joined tonight, as well as certainly all of our residents who have provided your questions and your comments. They're very valuable for staff and council in considering our plan moving forward. And if you do have any other comments or questions, please send those to our or visit our Engage Brant page to provide those, or send them to our riveraccess@brant.ca email. And following this, we will be looking at everybody's feedback and bring a report to council on May the 25th with further recommendations.
Great, thanks, Cindy. So again, Cindy's invited you all to continue to stay engaged in the process. I hope you will take the opportunity to do so. I want to thank, as Cindy just did, everyone for participating. A special thank you to those of you who were brave enough to join the conversation tonight and to share questions and comments. Thank you as well to our panel and responders, our various speakers and so forth. I know this project invites a lot of interest and passion, and thank you for the very civil and respectful dialogue that we've had this evening. I think you've given the county a lot to think about. I also, as Cindy did, wanted to thank all of the elected officials who have joined us this evening, but not only for their interest in tonight's topic, but for their ongoing valued service to the community. It's greatly appreciated. So just before I come back to wrap things up, I will invite Mayor Bailey to share some quick observations, and then we will draw things to a close. Mayor, go ahead, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I don't think you can see me, but you can hear me, and that's fine. Tonight's conversation was very disturbing to me, just because I'm very familiar with all three of the launches, and a lot of the people that called tonight. I know them very well, and I know what's been taken away from them before we begin. And we talked a lot about parking tonight, and parking to me is an unwinnable situation, because if we were to build a parking lot for 400 cars, that means 400 people more would be on the river, and that's not cool at all. And it's not what the river is there for, and it's not what it's been intended. It's not to be intended for people to be wandering down the river in a rubber dinghy with a beer load, a truckload of beer behind them, with no shirts in the sun in the summer, that's not what we're used to. That's not what we're all about. And that's not what I hope we're promoting. So to build a parking lot to fit everyone means that there's too many people on the river doing too many things that aren't supposed to be happening. So you can't drink and drive a boat. And I don't believe you can drink and drive a dinghy and or a kayak and or a canoe. So I think we have to do a lot into enforcement. I am sorry for what it's taken away. I know that the end of Forbes Street is a community area where people gather after supper with a mug full of coffee and they talk about what happened in Glen Morris that week. And I know that Chris Wiley can see Bean Park from his front porch. And I know how much it matters to everyone and how people stand at the Penman's Dam just to look over and hear the water and talk to the neighbors. And and this is something that really is not just about parking spots and access to the river. It's one of our first growing pains in the county as to things that are going to change. And there's no winner to tonight's discussion, because to have more parking and to have more access is to have more people doing incredibly ridiculous things on the river most of the time. So I thank staff for all the work they've done. I know that we're going to come up with many better solutions than what we have now. But it's a no-win situation at the moment, but I know that we're going to get through it and we're going to find out different ways of doing it. I know that Chief Hill and I have talked about another launch that's going to take you to Six Nations, which is going to be a wonderful place to play on the river respectfully. But you also have to remember that the people that are on the river now maybe didn't grow up around the river, and this disrespect or this carelessness that you're seeing with the litter and the garbage and the disrespect for the environment is something that's new to them, and we're going to have to teach them. We're going to have to teach them what it's like to live in the County of Brant. So with that being said, thank you everyone for taking the time tonight. Any meeting that brings over 90 people to a discussion is something that obviously needs to be talked about, and it's not over tonight, believe me. We're going to be talking about it very often as a council and as staff. And again, thank you all for coming, and thank you staff for all the hard work. And Glenn, you're always welcome to come back. I think sometimes you know more about the County of Brant than some of us do. So thank you very much for all your hard work.
Oh, thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your comments. So just give me 30 seconds, everybody. It really has been a pleasure serving as the independent facilitator for the session. Always a pleasure working with what is obviously a very thoughtful, knowledgeable, and articulate group. Again, we're very appreciative of the questions and comments that you shared tonight. I will now formally adjourn the session. Thank you to the various technical and other personnel who made the session possible. And again, thank you all for your participation. Enjoy what's left in your evening. Take care, stay safe, and good night, everyone.